Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football Sports Talk Radio. I'm going to be your host and producer for this afternoon show, Logan Landers. And join me here today, of course, my co-host today, Mr. William Yanish III, coming over from firstroundmock.com. How you doing this afternoon, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great, man.
Good, good. And of course, our very special guest interview today with author Steven Travers. Mr. Travers, first off, thank you so much for coming on the program. And how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm doing better now that I'm with you guys.
Glad to hear. Glad to hear. It's a pleasure to have you on. And
Thank
guys,
you.
before we get into it, if you enjoy the episode, give us a like, follow, share, subscribe. All of our social media channels, Facebook, YouTube, and of course, you can go and download our podcast every single week on all major podcast streaming platforms. So let's get into it, Mr. Travers. First question for you is: obviously, we know you are a huge fan of the USC program. Obviously, of course, with the USC baseball program.
Right.
So we know last week was selection Monday, and unfortunately for the Trojans, could not get in after losing, of course, to Arizona in the championship game. So, what were your thoughts? Did you think they had a high chance of getting in it overall?
Well, I really figured that they needed to win the conference championship in order to get in. There was a hope that because they were very hot at the end, that would demonstrate something. And also, there was a time where the USC name alone would sort of get you in, but those days have passed. You know, they're not that kind of a program anymore. I love their coach. I've become friends with him, Coach Stankiewicz. I felt badly that they didn't make it. What really was sad was their loss to Arizona with a 3-0 lead through 7. And they had this kid throwing a shutout, and they took him out, and the bullpen could not hold. And, you know, that was a tough loss. My high school team was beaten in the North Coast section title game earlier in the day.
Man.
It was a double whammy for
How about a real 1-2 punch?
my alumni. Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, like you said, they came on strong, just not enough at the end. And obviously, now we're getting into the super regionals in college baseball. So that, of course, always a fun time for all those kids heading out there to good old Omaha. Well, Mr. Yanish, I'll give you the ball, man. I know you got a couple questions lined up, so I'll go ahead and give you the floor, sir.
Oh man, yeah, I'm going to jump right into the USC thing. And again, I'm a writer for firstroundmock.com, and it's no secret, we've had our doubts about Caleb Williams and how he can succeed in the NFL. The question that I have is how you feel he can succeed in the NFL, and if you feel or how you feel about Miller Moss coming in, and if he can draw or garner the same national attention like Caleb has the last few years.
I have a plus attitude on both of them. I don't consider Caleb to be an absolute can't miss, but I probably would have made him the number 1 pick. His potential is absolutely outstanding. What I like about him is he's a smart kid. He's a hard worker. He's a football savant who was raised like all of this sort of new age type of athlete that we see now since their earliest days. They've gotten special coaching from camps and private tutors and what have you. So the kid was ready for Division I football right away, and came into SC and had a good coach and a good system and was outstanding. That being said, I was at the Notre Dame game at South Bend, and he had a terrible, terrible day in a really big situation. And that was not good. And he dropped the ball down the stretch. Why, I'm not sure. Mainly, I think the team's defense was so porous that in some ways almost Caleb might have felt, he never said this, but you could feel for him like, God, no matter what this kid does, he needs to score 55 points a game. So he's going to go to a team. Hopefully he'll have more support from the overall team than he had at USC. And then regarding Miller Moss, I don't know a lot about him other than what I saw. And I think it was the Holiday Bowl. He played a fabulous game. Of course, some of the rules were a little bit off in that game. I'm not sure everybody was playing that day, but from what I saw a kid who probably earned the number one spot. And, you don't have to be this big flash, the best athlete in order to take a college football team to a title or even a Super Bowl team. Can you manage what you have? They have to play defense. That's all there is to
I definitely hear that. And, as a kid growing up, how I became a, San Francisco 49ers fan, I was going up and down the coast with my dad between Crescent City and Brookings, Oregon, Crescent City, California, and down to Santa Rosa in the Bay Area, in the 80s. My dad had met Billy Kilmer back in the day and got a football tryout. And his car wreck was supposedly maybe not a car wreck because he didn't want to get my dad in trouble because he hit him so hard in practice.
Wow.
At least that's the story that I heard, and it goes down.
That's what your dad tells me. Yeah.
Yeah. So however it goes, long tales or long stories and short tales. Anyway,
I can just imagine the barroom scene in Washington with Billy Kilmer and Sonny Jurgensen, because those guys.
Man, there were some stories of my dad and the Mission District down there in San Francisco and Billy Kilmer, and that's how I grew up. The Niners fan. But before the 2024 draft, I had the Niners picking South Carolina wide receiver Xavier Legette at 31. So it wasn't a surprise that they grabbed Ricky Pearsall. It was a little bit. He had showed out at the Senior Bowl, but I think it's fair picking. I'm giving him a chance. As a Niners fan, we mostly feel that this is the team that can win a Super Bowl. And this is a pretty, maybe not a leading question so much, but do you think that the San Francisco 49ers can bring home their sixth Lombardi in 2024?
Yes, the answer is yes. But, what am I predicting it? I actually have tickets I'm taking my daughter and my son-in-law to the 49ers at the Buffalo Bills December 1st. So I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be cold. It's going to be, a different sort of atmosphere for a family that grew up at the LA Coliseum. Very different.
That's for sure.
Yeah. But it's going to be a lot of fun. I think, I see a guy like Miller Moss, as we were talking about him earlier. I see a guy like that as being someone like Brock Purdy. These are not super Michael Vick type athletics, but they're solid. And Purdy is a very solid quarterback. He's proved it for 2 years. There's no question that he's a winner. He's been a winner, since high school, college, and into professional football. And he's found a system and a coach that is good for him. So I like their chances. I think, regarding that game in December 1st, I'm hoping that that's going to be a Super Bowl preview, considering that the Bills with Josh Allen came within inches of beating the Chiefs. The Chiefs, they might have been the world champions, but they had a lot of close games to get there. They could have been upended. So I think answering your question, there's no 1972 Dolphin team in pro football that I see this year. I think it's a wide open array for anybody who's just got to put together a season and keep the injuries to a minimum and come through in the big games when everything's on the line. And the question is, do you do that? You can't make a prediction at this point that what you're going to do in the fourth quarter of a title game or a Super Bowl game when you're up by 5, are you going to hold that lead? That's the key moment. And that they did not answer the call last year or the year before. Maybe they will this year.
We'll see what happens. Well, you mentioned the 1972 Dolphins. Let's go back a little bit further. Let's go back to 1970. I want you to describe September the 12th, 1970, and why you think that's such an important date in football history, really life history, and of course, obviously with the USC program there?
Well, that was a tipping point, in which there were a lot of events that happened on and off the football field and in the civil rights era that led up to that day. And a lot of people, some of my younger readers, have often expressed an amazement, and we're talking about the integration of collegiate football. Wow, they're often saying it took till 1970, because you think, wow, think of the 60s. People think of the 1960s and they had the free love and the summer of love and the civil rights movement, and so much was happening and so much change. And there was, but was it happening in the South? Well, it didn't happen as quickly. But it did happen on September 12th, 1970, when the USC Trojans, with a very integrated squad in which many of their best players were African American, including the great Sam Bam Cunningham, traveled to Birmingham, Alabama, to play an all-white team, the University of Alabama, under Bear Bryant at Legion Field. They won the game handily, and people saw that as an event where they begin to change their minds and understand. And what happens is, SC was a very classy team. They were coached by the great John McKay, who was a good friend of Bear Bryant. And I think people felt like, well, he's friends with Bryant, and he runs a program very much like Bryant. It's very classy. It's very highly skilled and organized and disciplined. And they saw something demonstrated before their eyes on that day that made a lot of minds change. Like, I think we're going to have to change with the times if we're going to compete at this level with the Penn States, the Notre Dames, the other teams that were really good in college football at that time. But let's remember, Alabama already was in the process of doing this. This is, my friend Keith Donovan would point this out. In fact, they'd had two African-American walk-ons as early as 1967. And they really didn't make the team, I guess, because they weren't good enough. But in 1969, they brought in a running back, later played for the 49ers. Shoot, what's his name? He was a star for the 49ers. Well, anyway, he had been recruited and was in the stands that day because he wasn't eligible as a freshman. And they were also recruiting another kid from Mobile, and Sylvester Croom, who later became a head coach at Mississippi State. He was being recruited. So I think what Bryant wanted was a demonstration that there's going to be black players on the field. This is what it's going to look like. This is what our program is going to look like. It wasn't like Bryant changed his mind. Bryant wanted to recruit African Americans long before this, but it was hard for him to do it. And he put in the work and the time to get to the position where he could effectively do it. And he did do it effectively. And the program benefited greatly and became even better than they had been.
Yes, sir. It looks like I have answers to that question. Was it either Wilbur Jackson
or
John Mitchell? One of the two.
Yeah, and John Mitchell was the other kid who had been recruited. McKay had him set and was playing golf with Bryant in the offseason. And by the way, I got a kid from Mobile, Alabama named John Mitchell. He's going to be a Trojan next year. And McKay goes, "Oh, is that right?" And McKay excused himself and made his way to the clubhouse of the golf course and made a little phone call. Next thing you know, John Mitchell was being recruited, and it's like, well, I got a chance to play for Bear Bryant. He's from Alabama. He snatched him away from McKay.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Oh, what a story that one is. Yeah, just make a quick phone call real quick. Just, All right, Mr. Yanish, I'll give you the ball back once again, sir. Any other questions you got for Mr. Travers?
All right, man. I got one last one. I mean, since you were an obviously, successful writer, and, I've read like a ton of your stuff, getting ready for this. And, as an aspiring writer, this podcast thing is just because of how technology goes these days. This is why I do that. Otherwise I am just a writer. And, But since you are a successful writer, and I'm right on the verge of, I'm being quoted, I'm getting some play here and there, getting a million hits on the website in the first year and a half with Daniel Kelly at firstroundmock.com and everything else like that. I mean, what advice would you give me or anyone listening that is in the same situation to break through that last barrier and sustain success?
I think you seem to be on the right track as it is. And I would continue writing. If that's what you love to do, if you have a passion for it, continue to write and look at some of the great older writers of the 60s and 70s. I would look at some of the great stuff that came out of Sports Illustrated. You can still read that stuff at si.com. They've got a vault, and some of their great football writers and baseball writers. And I mean, what they were doing in those days was long form journalism, and it's hard to do that these days because nobody's going to print. And the only place to do that is really online, and that's where you are. So I would do that along with what you're doing now. The podcast, that's really where people are going today. But let me tell you something. Since the Roman Empire, there have always been a need for scribes and historians and people to write it down and describe what happened, because people will always want to look back and find out what was happening back in the day. I mean, that's why Jesus Christ came into the earth, 2,000 years ago, because the Roman Empire had scribes and roads and ways for his message to be delivered. So I know your message is not quite the same as that, but think of that as good inspiration.
Thank you, sir.
Got a question here from the comments. Mr. Travers says, what about the 1972 USC football team, the greatest college football team? Well, give us your thoughts on them. How was that season like? I know that was a magical ride. I
agree. I mean, all-time great teams. I mean, 1924 Fighting Irish, 1945 West Point Cadets, 1995 Nebraska, 2001 Miami, maybe one of the recent Clemson and Bama teams, and the 72 Trojans for sure. A team that I don't think they ever trailed. I think they trailed 7-0 against Arkansas in the first 3 minutes of the opening game at Fayetteville, never trailed again. Just annihilated their opposition, beat the holy you-know-what out of the Ohio State Buckeyes in the Rose Bowl. I mean, you had Rod McNeil, Anthony Davis, and Sam Cunningham just in their backfield. You had Mike Ray and Pat Hayden were their two of their quarterbacks. I mean, Pat Hayden sitting on the bench. Mike Ray, who later was with the Raiders, was an excellent pro, outstanding, and their defense. And one of my best friends, well, Cunningham was a good friend, but one of my best friends, Charles Tree Young, a wonderful tight end, big oak tree of a guy, averaged 25 yards per catch, in 1972, later played for years and won a couple Super Bowls. And, this team really, the 72 team kind of forms the Raiders champions of just a couple of years later. Al Davis was a former USC coach, and he just loved the program. And he liked to draft those guys, and a lot of Trojans became Raiders. John Vella, Mike Ray, and others.
Yeah, I might say that definitely kind of shaped that future for those Raiders. The decade they had, the dominance of getting all those Super Bowl rings. So, yeah, that was definitely kind of a turning point for that franchise as well. Just one more question for you, Mr. Travis. We'll go back to your being an author and writing. So obviously we know you've wrote a lot of books about a lot of different topics as well, not just really one. You've wrote, of course, the Good, Bad, and Ugly series with the Raiders, 49ers, so on and so forth. Wrote about the Lakers, wrote about the Mets, the Dodgers, the Athletics. So what kind of goes into your head of, you know what, I'm going to write about so and so, I'm going to write about this topic this time, and how you can just kind of switch things up, easily?
Well, a lot of it goes back to your youth, because your youth is where a lot of your thinking is formed. And, I was lucky enough to have a grandfather and a father who gave me books and gave me things to read and inspired me. So as I mentioned earlier, some of the great authors and writers in sports, and not just in sports, but Tom Wolfe, Hunter Thompson, people like that, that I read when I was young. And I was inspired to write like that, or to kind of follow in their footsteps. So a lot of this, not all, but a lot of it, is what I remember when I was a kid. And these are things that just get stuck in my head, and don't even really need to be researched, because I was there.
Yeah.
I was at the Oakland Coliseum. I was at the LA Coliseum. I was, at the Forum. I saw the Raiders. I saw the Trojans. I saw the A's in person. And it made an indelible impression on me. So I think that comes through in my writing. If you're there and you can recall it well, like I do, it'll shine through.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, that passion you had for them as a kid, you don't even need to research most of it. You can just go for memory's sake. And obviously that helps, put pen to paper, or I guess in this case, just keyboards onto a screen, just a little bit quicker.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got to check it. Sometimes it's funny. One of my favorite writers, John Milius, was talking about, he wrote Apocalypse Now, and he based it upon the novel Heart of Darkness, which had been written in 1890. And he had read it when he was in high school, and then he was going to adapt Apocalypse Now based upon Heart of Darkness. But it's funny, he said, I didn't reread it, because he said, I had an image in my mind as to what I had read and what this was going to be, and I didn't want to reread it, and maybe it would be a little different. So he wrote it without rereading it, because he had a fantastical version in his mind of what it was going to be, and I think it made it even better.
I think so. We'll go one more question here from the comments. So where would you rate O.J. Simpson in terms of just college running backs? We all know how good the juice was back donning that Trojan helmet.
Well, that's funny, because when I was getting my Bills tickets, I was talking to the guy, in the Bills ticket office, and I noticed we were in row 32, and I said, that's O.J. Simpson.
Yes, it is. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
O.J. Simpson, this is why I became a USC fanatic. My father went to Galileo High School, which is where O.J. went, but not at the same time. My father was then a professor at City College of San Francisco when O.J. played there for 2 years. He had a class with O.J. in it, and he helped O.J. get into USC, gave him some advice and some help, along with some other people. And so I'm just a little kid, and next thing I know, we're watching the University of Southern California, and I'm asking my dad, who are these guys? He says, well, there's a kid named O.J. who's been in a class of mine, and so I'm watching I'm following it, and of course, he's winning Heisman trophies and national titles. And so in a very short period of time, I am utterly infatuated with anything to do with USC. And I was a baseball player. And when I found out Tom Seaver had gone to USC, that clinched. That was it. That was over. There was nobody else that I wanted to, no other place that I wanted to go to school. So, and I've just been with them ever since, through thick and thin, and some thin, but a lot of.
lot of good thick too. That's always good. Always good. Well, Mr. Travers, now's the time to let people know where they can find your work, or where they can follow your work on social media, or anything along those lines.
Well, I have an author page at Amazon, but yeah, hey, feel free to find me on Facebook. I'm very active on Facebook, and that's a place where you can actually find me and message me and read what I'm thinking, for better or worse. So actually, Facebook is a fun place to reach me. Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, we'd like to thank you for coming on the show today. It's all been a pleasure talking with you. Of course, Mr. Yanish, always, of course, my co-host, helping me out. I've been your host and producer, Logan Landers, guys. And go enjoy your weekends, and we'll talk to you again on another live episode. We'll see you later.